The dusty main street of Redemption Creek lay silent under a blanket of stars when Jacob Morgan finally admitted to himself that loneliness was eating him alive. At 42, he built a respectable ranch on the edge of town, raised cattle that fetched good prices, and earned the trust of every man who'd ever shaken his hand. But the silence in his cabin had grown so thick he could almost choke on it. Jacob was a man of few words, always had been. His father used to joke that he was born with his mouth shut and his ears open, which served him well in a territory where loose tongues got men killed. He preferred the company of horses to most people, found peace in the rhythm of hard work, and had long ago accepted that marriage wasn't likely in the cards for a man as set in his ways as he was. But that winter had been particularly brutal, and something about watching the snow pile up outside his window night after night made him realize he didn't want to die alone. So he did what plenty of men did in those days when choices were limited and pride could be swallowed. He placed an advertisement in the territorial newspaper seeking a wife. He'd been careful with his words. Rancher seeks quiet, practical woman for marriage. Must be hardworking, even-tempered, and content with simple country life. No romantic notions. He'd read it over 3 times before sending it, satisfied that he'd made his expectations clear. The responses trickled in over the following weeks. Most were exactly what he'd hoped for. Plain letters from plain women who understood the transaction they were entering into. Companionship and security in exchange for domestic labor and loyalty. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated. Then came the letter from Eleanor Vaughn. Her handwriting was neat enough, her words polite and appropriate. She claimed to be 28, experienced in household management, and looking for a fresh start after the death of her parents. She mentioned nothing that raised any red flags. Jacob studied the small photograph she'd included. A serious face, dark hair pulled back severely, eyes that stared straight at the camera without a hint of a smile. Perfect, he thought. She looked exactly like the kind of woman who wouldn't disturb his peace. He wrote back proposing marriage, and 6 weeks later, he stood on the platform of the Redemption Creek railway station waiting for her train to arrive. He'd scrubbed himself clean, put on his Sunday clothes, and rehearsed in his mind the simple, dignified greeting he'd offer her. They'd have a quiet ceremony at the church, a modest supper at the hotel, and then begin their sensible, peaceful life together. The train pulled in with a great hiss of steam and squealing of brakes. Jacob scanned the passengers as they disembarked, looking for that serious, severe woman from the photograph. An elderly couple emerged first, then a salesman with his cases, a family with squalling children. Then she appeared. Jacob's first thought was that there had been some terrible mistake. The woman who stepped off that train bore only a passing resemblance to the photograph. Oh, the basic features were the same, but everything else was wrong. Her dark hair, which should have been pinned up tight and proper, cascaded in loose waves around her shoulders. Her dress, while respectable, hugged curves that hadn't been apparent in the stiff photograph. And her eyes, those eyes that had stared so solemnly at the camera, were dancing with barely contained energy as they swept across the platform. When her gaze landed on him, a smile broke across her face that was anything but quiet or subdued. "Mr. Morgan?" she called out, her voice carrying across the platform with the kind of volume that made heads turn. Before he could answer, she'd closed the distance between them, her single carpetbag swinging at her side. "I'd recognize you anywhere. You look exactly like a man who knows his way around cattle and trouble." Jacob opened his mouth to deliver his prepared greeting, but she was already talking again. "I hope you don't mind, but I sent most of my things ahead. Should arrive in a few days. I figured we could get the wedding done quick and then I could start making that ranch of yours into a proper home. Lord knows men living alone don't know the first thing about comfort. My father, God rest him, would eat beans straight from the can if my mother didn't stop him." She linked her arm through his as naturally as if they'd known each other for years, and Jacob found himself being steered down the platform, his carefully planned greeting dying in his throat. The wedding took place the next morning, as planned, but nothing else went according to Jacob's expectations. Eleanor, who insisted he call her Ellie within 5 minutes of meeting her, filled the quiet church with laughter during the ceremony. She squeezed his hand so hard during the vows that he almost winced, and when the Reverend gave permission for him to kiss his bride, she threw her arms around his neck with such enthusiasm that his hat fell off. At the hotel supper, she charmed every person in the dining room, telling stories about her journey west with such animation that people from other tables leaned over to listen. Jacob sat there, his fork hovering over his plate, wondering what in God's name he'd gotten himself into. The ride out to the ranch was worse. Ellie peppered him with questions about everything they passed. How many acres did he own? What kind of cattle did he prefer? Did he have any horses that needed gentling? Had he ever dealt with rustlers? What about that interesting rock formation over there? Did it have a name? Jacob answered in his usual monosyllables, hoping his terseness would eventually convey that he preferred silence. It didn't. Ellie seemed perfectly content to fill any gap in conversation herself, moving from topic to topic with the agility of a jackrabbit dodging a coyote. By the time they reached the ranch house, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Ellie jumped down from the wagon before he could help her, spinning in a circle to take in the house, the barn, the corrals, the distant mountains. "It's perfect," she breathed, and for the first time since stepping off that train, she was quiet. Jacob felt a small measure of relief. Maybe she was just nervous, he told himself. Maybe she'd settled down now that they were home. That hope lasted approximately 15 minutes. Inside the house, Ellie began opening cabinets and drawers, making small noises of dismay at what she found. "Oh, Jacob, honey, you've been living like a hermit. Where are your proper dishes? And Lord have mercy, is this the only pot you own? We're going to have to make a trip into town. I'll need supplies to make this place livable." "It's been livable for 15 years, Jacob said, his first full sentence since leaving the hotel. Ellie turned to him with that brilliant smile. "Livable for a bachelor, maybe. But we're married now, sweetheart. That changes things." She'd called him honey and sweetheart in the span of 30 seconds. Jacob felt the walls of his quiet life crumbling around him. That first night, lying in bed beside this whirlwind of a woman he'd somehow married, Jacob stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. Ellie had finally stopped talking, her breathing evening out into sleep, but even in rest, she took up space. One arm was flung across his chest, one leg hooked over his, her hair tickling his shoulder. He'd wanted quiet. He'd been so clear about that. And somehow, he'd ended up with the loudest, most vibrant, most thoroughly alive woman in the entire territory. The days that followed confirmed his fears. Ellie was up before dawn, singing while she made breakfast. She rearranged his kitchen, then his parlor, then his barn. She had opinions about everything, which she shared freely and often. She befriended his ranch hands within hours, learning their names and stories and teasing them until even his gruffest cowboy was smiling. She also, Jacob discovered with growing confusion, knew her way around a ranch. She could ride better than half his men, could rope a calf without breaking a sweat, and had a gift for spotting sick cattle before anyone else noticed. When he mentioned needing to break a particularly stubborn mare, Ellie had the horse eating out of her hand within a week. At night she'd curl up next to him and talk about her day, her plans for tomorrow, her ideas for improving the ranch. Jacob would grunt his responses, still clinging to his preference for silence, but finding it harder and harder to maintain his gruffness in the face of her relentless warmth. 3 weeks into their marriage, they had their first real fight. Jacob had come in from a long day of mending fences to find Ellie had invited half the town to a barn dance on Saturday. "We're not social people," he'd said, his voice flat. "You're not a social person," Ellie corrected. "I haven't decided what I am yet, but I know I'm not going to dry up and blow away in this beautiful place just because you prefer silence to joy." "I never asked for joy. I asked for quiet." Ellie had gone very still then, her eyes searching his face. "Is that really what you want, Jacob? Quiet? Or do you want quiet because you're afraid of what might happen if you let yourself feel something more?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He turned and walked out, saddling his horse and riding into the darkness without another word. He stayed out there for hours, beneath the vast expanse of stars, forcing himself to be honest. The truth was, he had grown fond of Ellie's noise. The house felt wrong when she wasn't singing in it. His meals tasted better because she took joy in cooking them. His ranch hands worked harder because she made them laugh. And at night, when she pressed against him and whispered her dreams into the darkness, he felt something he thought was long dead stirring in his chest. He was terrified of it. He'd lost people before. His mother when he was young, his father to a riding accident, a brother to fever. He'd learned that caring meant hurting, and he built his quiet life as protection against that pain. Ellie, with her noise and her energy and her relentless affection, was tearing down every wall he'd spent decades building. When he rode back as dawn was breaking, Ellie was sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in a shawl, her face streaked with tears. She looked up as he dismounted, and he saw raw vulnerability in her eyes. "I lied to you," she said quietly. "Not about the facts, but about who I was. I saw your advertisement asking for a quiet wife, and I thought I could be that. I thought if I just tried hard enough, I could make myself smaller, quieter, less troublesome. But I can't, Jacob. This is who I am. And if that's not what you want, if you need me to leave, I'll go. But I won't spend my life apologizing for taking up space." Jacob stood there, this woman who'd turned his world upside down sitting broken-hearted on his porch, and something inside him finally, irrevocably broke open. He sat down beside her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he was the one who reached for her. "I don't want you to leave," he said, his voice rough. "And I don't want you quiet. I thought I did, but I was wrong. You make everything louder, yes. But you also make everything more alive. Including me. Especially me." Ellie turned to him, hope dawning in her eyes. "Yeah? Yeah." He pulled her close, feeling her warmth against him. "I'm sorry I've been such a stubborn fool. I've been so busy protecting myself from feeling anything that I almost missed out on feeling everything." She laughed through her tears, that bright, full laugh that had startled him so much on the train platform. "So the barn dance is happening? The barn dance is happening." And it did. Half the territory showed up, and Jacob found himself actually enjoying it. He danced with his wife, watched her spin and laugh and fill the barn with light, and realized that love wasn't always quiet. Sometimes it was loud and messy and terrifying and absolutely perfect. That night, after the last guest had left, and they'd climbed the stairs to their bedroom, Ellie turned to him with a look that made his breath catch. "I have one more confession," she said softly. "I didn't just want a quiet life on a ranch. I wanted you. From the moment I saw your advertisement, something told me you were mine. And I'd ride through hell itself to get to you." Jacob pulled her close, finally understanding that the wild, vibrant woman he'd married hadn't disrupted his peace. She'd shown him what peace really was, not silence, but the sound of two hearts beating in rhythm, not emptiness, but fullness to overflowing. She'd ridden into his quiet life like a storm, and he'd never been more grateful for anything in his life.